Exploration, survival, and building simulators are a dime a dozen these days. While these sorts of games have been around for a long time, they never really seemed to come into their own until the advent of Minecraft, an open-world adventure game. For all of its fun and challenges, there was always something the game never really touched: the ocean. What would it be like to have a game a little like Minecraft, but underwater? While that might not have been the question the developers at Unknown Worlds Entertainment, most notable for the sci-fi first-person shooter Natural Selection, asked themselves before they started creating Subnautica, but here we are. Subnautica is labeled as an underwater, open-world adventure game, and that's really all that needs to be said about it. As a warning, I'd like to note that Subnautica takes place almost exclusively underwater. If you have a fear of the ocean and what lies in wait beneath the waves, thalassophobia, then this review is not for you. While you clamber frantically for a button to close the window, here's a picture of puppies. We'll catch you next review. For those of you that stayed, congratulations! Hopefully we won't terrify you too much. Subnautica's gameplay consists largely of 4 separate activities: explore, survive, gather, and build. When you first begin the game and you're given full control of your character, the game basically gives you no real direction. Just like in a real survival situation, what you decide to do with your time and energy is up to you. This lack of hand-holding makes them the majority of Subnautica's challenge. If you're the kind of person who isn't good at solving problems, this game is probably not for you. The game encourages exploration from the moment you start, because it confines you to one room with 2 exits. The game tries to direct your attention to the Fabricator, a device that you'll be using a lot. The Fabricator, with the right items, creates things for you, be it food, water, tools, deployables, and equipment. The vast majority of what can be created in the game can be created with the Fabricator, making it the single most important item in the game, and pretty much the only direction the game gives you. There's not much in the way of tutorials here. Most savvy players will quickly realize that traveling further than the immediate area you landed in will require certain equipment and tools: fins for swimming faster, oxygen tanks for staying underwater longer, a scanner to understand the world around you. So in a sense, the game is all about progressing so you can move further out from safety, along with the ability to explore further into the depths. Once you get the hang of it, survival is fairly easy. After some exploration with the Fabricator's menus, you'll learn that you can cook up fish, and some fish can be used to create water to drink. Ensuring that your hunger and thirst stay up is a cinch, as is keeping your health high. The creatures that can hurt you can usually be outswam, and even if you're damaged, the starting life pod has a device that creates health kits for you every now and then. Stockpiling a few of these while you play the game so you have some at all times is usually a good idea. Another facet of the game that you'll get into early on is building. You'll be able to create a device that allows you to convert gathered materials into buildings and objects. You'll first create a foundation and then likely a tube. While the game doesn't tell you this, to create oxygen you need power. If your tube is close to the surface, a solar panel or 2 on top will do just fine. Just like that, you'll have the start of your own safe little underwater base. As you explore and discover more and varied rooms and objects, your base will grow considerably to be your home away from home. Gone are the cramped quarters of your life pod in exchange for a much larger area that can hold all the stuff that you'll gather. Speaking of gathering, in order to build tools, equipment, buildings, or just about anything else in the game, you need to gather the resources to create them. Most of the resources in the game are fairly easy to find, resources like gold, silver, and titanium, but others require a little more exploration and venturing into danger. Thankfully, you'll inevitably scan parts and unlock the ability to create and utilize vehicles like the Sea Glide, Sea Moth, and Cyclops that allow for safer, quicker, and easier travel to more dangerous areas for rarer resources. Of course, these vehicles don't allow for perfectly safe travel. You still have to be wary to avoid the worst the ocean has to offer. It's worth noting that the game has very little story to speak of, so if you play these kind of games for that sort of thing, you'll be sorely disappointed. For the most part, most of the story or lore is largely contained in abandoned PDAs that you'll find scattered about the ocean, and you'll have to read them to discover their contents. These abandoned PDAs are a bit of a missed opportunity, as the contents of these PDAs could have been voiced to put you more into the game instead of forcing you to read it. What story isn't relegated specifically to PDAs merely seems to act as a way to get you out and into the ocean, to visit various biomes and see what sorts of rewards and dangers await you there. Judging just by the fact that the story takes a backseat to other aspects of the game, it's clear that the developers wanted you focused on other aspects of the game. Also, I just want to say that the Cyclops is one of the coolest and most fulfilling vehicles to create and pilot I've ever seen in a game.
Welcome aboard, Captain. All systems online. Engine powering up. Ahead flagged. Emergency speed. Warning. Calculating.
In terms of the game's music, Subnautica's tunes are very fitting to the game and the areas you explore. Tracks are calmer and more subdued when you're traversing safer waters, while in more dangerous biomes, the music is appropriately unnerving or tense, fitting of the idea that exploration in Subnautica is inherently unsafe and anything can happen at any time to end your journey. I feel like a lot of the tracks in the game may have been inspired by the Metroid series, as the two series have alien world exploration in common. It goes without saying that a game that takes place strictly underwater should have amazing looking water and convincing water effects, and Subnautica is no slouch. When the sun is high and you're close to the surface, you can see the sunbeams filter through the water. Approaching and being in fauna-heavy areas tints the water green, adding an impressive ambiance. The further down you get, the less light reaches those areas, and the darker things get, requiring illumination to best see threats in the abyss. Even looking at the water shows that the developers spent plenty of time perfecting this important feature. Fans of clean, futuristic science fiction will find plenty to enjoy here. Buildings created are sterile whites with a minimalist, albeit futuristic presentation. There is some minor control on the color palette, but those are relegated purely to the game's vehicles. While your options are limited at first, you'll inevitably find the blueprints to create new kinds of buildings, while actually building your base is seamless and enjoyable, usually only requiring minimal resources. Finally, the biomes of Subnautica are varied and interesting, and definitely encourage exploration. Shallows play host to colorful fish and relatively harmless creatures. Kelp areas hide scary predators in the early game, but are the only places you can easily find certain resources. Underground caverns play host to neon-bright mushrooms and large, intimidating worms ready to nibble on your leg. That's only a small sampling of the kind of places you'll visit in Subnautica. Of course, Subnautica isn't without its blemishes. Resources in the game tend to be everywhere, and unless you create a lot of storage, you'll find yourself in possession of large amounts of resources that you have no real use for. The only resource in the game you can never have enough of is titanium, especially if you plan to build. Finding resources in the early game requires a considerable time sink, made more difficult by the fact that finding certain outcroppings is a pain. It's much easier to find sandstone outcroppings than limestone outcroppings. As a result, you'll have a surplus of gold and silver ore and not much to do with it, as opposed to the more immediately valuable copper ore. Finding some resources are difficult and not immediately obvious. For example, enameled glass requires a tooth from a low-tier, crocodile-like predator called a stalker. Unless you're very observant, you'll never know that you'll have to wait for them to scoop up pieces of scrap metal off the seafloor. When they do so, you may see a single tooth float down. Seeing it and actually following where it landed can be tricky, and God help you if you've cleaned out these areas of scrap metal beforehand. Though I think the most offensive blight this game has to offer is the way it handles geography while traversing through areas. Going through them slowly, such as in the early game when your speed is fairly limited, you'd never know there was a problem. Once you acquire the sea moth and you have a much larger area to explore, you'll find that the game constantly loads objects in late, the geography becomes jagged and only smooths out as you become closer, and things spawn in and out constantly. One of the most notable examples is when the game loads metal salvage late. It does a leap through the water, spinning wildly. These aren't a danger to normal gameplay, but don't exactly help keep you in the game. I don't know if it's me or a fluke, but the game also has this weird bug that allows you to see certain objects or lights when you shouldn't normally. For example, anytime I look at the aurora, I can see the fiery remains of it. It was useful to help me get my bearings, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't take me out of the game constantly. The same can be said about base lighting, allowing you to see exactly where your base is from a considerable distance away. Even on low graphics, the game has a tendency to hang for some reason, sometimes for more than a few seconds at a time. I can't really find a good reason for this, but it did it fairly frequently on my first two playthroughs. There must have been some notable improvement between the first time I played back in January to the second time I played in September, because it didn't crash a single time, and the freezing, normally several seconds at a time, wasn't nearly as bad, down to maybe 1 or 2 seconds. Even then, it gives the sense that the game is still poorly optimized, that it still has a couple more months left to go in the oven before it's truly ready. What hasn't been fixed in all this time are the load times. Oh god, the load times. I have a strong PC, and even on lower settings, the game took around a full minute just to finish loading. It's not a huge problem since it gives me time to go grab a snack while waiting for my game to load, but I can't recall the last time I've ever had to wait so long just to play a game. Finally, it's worth noting that the game is still in early access as of this review, and has been for almost 3 years. Its official release date is in October of 2017, but sadly, even after being in development for longer than 3 years, it still feels as though the game has a long way to go before it's ready for an actual release. Like any game, Subnautica has a mix of good and bad aspects to it, but what it does good, it does really, really good. For example, after nearly 30 plus hours of gameplay total across 2 different playthroughs, every time I think I've seen everything there is to see, I inevitably stumbled across something completely new that reinvigorated my desire to explore the game. I've never seen this. In addition, it seems that the developers are still supporting the product, hard at work for their October official release date. I'd also like to mention that a lot of my gripes for the game were from playing the game's survival mode, which forces you to consider your food and water levels in addition to your oxygen. The game has other modes as well, such as freedom mode, which lets you play without hunger and thirst, hardcore mode, that gives you only 1 life for added challenge, and creative mode, which lets you build whatever you want with no constraints like oxygen and hunger. While creative is a nice addition to the game for people who only want to build huge, impressive bases and mess with everything the game has to offer, there's ultimately not enough content in the game to warrant simply purchasing it to build things. If your computer can handle it, you don't mind that the game's story takes a backseat to everything else in the game, and you aren't bothered that the game has a few performance issues, I strongly recommend Subnautica for the $20 price tag. Even if $20 is too much for you, most major sales see Subnautica with a discount. The lowest I've seen it go for is $10, which is an extremely reasonable price for a game like Subnautica. Hey, nice work, you survived all the way to the end. If you're hungry after all that swimming, subscribe to us here on YouTube. You can also find our Twitter and Minds accounts in the description for the video, where you can keep up with my inane ramblings, as well as my Twitch page. You can join us when we stream. See you next time.